All right, 484.5 or 484.1 or 484.7 or any of those, do you see where it's telling you to code first the underlying disease? So here we have a pneumonia in an infectious disease classified elsewhere. So if we have a pneumonia in a cytomegalic inclusion disease, then the cytomegalic, it gets coded as the underlying disease. If we have pneumonia in whooping cough, then the whooping cough gets the underlying disease, because the whooping cough is what was there and it created the manifestation of the pneumonia afterwards. But watch your directions. Is that another reason why you cannot code directly from the alphabetic? Yes, because this information is just not in the alphabetic, it's only in the tabular.
Yeah, because it says, by reading the book, it says go to the alphabetic first and then the tabular. It tells you to double check.
Yep, you've got to double check yourself. Also, you get instructions to use additional codes sometimes when you need a code to further explain what's going on. Flip over to code 595. That's cystitis, inflammation of the bladder. It excludes prostatitis when you're talking about the bladder and the prostate. That gets coded to 601.3. It tells us to use an additional code to identify the organism, such as E. coli. So we know the patient has cystitis. We know the causative organism. We also give it a code for the organism. Now, if we don't know the type of organism that it is, can we code it? No. But if the diagnosis has specified the type of organism, or if the chart has specified the type of organism, then we can actually go in and code the organism itself. So again, the book tells you to do it, and whatever the book tells you to do, then you need to follow through on. All right, then finally you've got code, if applicable, any causal condition first. All right, and this is when you've got a causal condition that's present. It would be sequenced before the code to which this note is attached. An example, let's look at 707.1. We've got an ulcer of the lower limbs, except a decubitus, except a bed sore. And if applicable, code any causal condition first. All right, so if I have atherosclerosis of the extremities with ulceration, that is really the underlying disease that has caused my ulcer, hasn't it? Or if I have chronic venous hypertension with an ulcer, what really caused that ulcer to happen? That hypertension did. So again, it all kind of goes back to the fact that we code to the etiology of disease. All right, if I'm looking at 707.11, ulcer of the thigh, well, that really doesn't tell me a whole lot anyway, does it? But if it happened to have been due to diabetes, notice that we're going to code the diabetes first, followed by the ulcer of the thigh. So again, always keep in mind you're coding to the underlying disease. All right, there are abbreviations that you've got to know, and the two in particular we're going to talk about right now. One is NEC, or not elsewhere classifiable, and the other is not NOS, for not otherwise specified. I want you to look up the code in the alphabetic. I want you to go and find herpes, H-E-R-P-E-S. All right, from there, I'd like for you to find herpes zoster. Now, we know that that's the medical term for shingles. So, herpes zoster. Now, I'd like for you to find herpes zoster of the ear. First one to get it, just holler it out. 053.71. Now, what's herpes zoster of the outside ear. This is a little more classifying because you've got to remember your medical terminology. Yes, because otitis is inflammation of the ear, externa being the external ear. Okay? All right, what is herpes zoster of the cornea? 053.21. What is herpes zoster of the leg? NEC, not elsewhere classifiable. So you've had to go through the entire list under herpes zoster, and you're thinking, well, it's none of these are listed, but then you see specified site, not elsewhere classifiable, meaning not elsewhere listed as a specific entity, so that's where you pick the NEC. Now notice that that ends in a .9. You're going to grow to learn that the .9s are kind of catch-all codes. All right, so let's look up 053.9 and see what it ends up being. .9 is herpes zoster without mention of complication. Oh, and underneath that it has herpes zoster, not otherwise specified. Well, we're classifying now. We're not coding because we didn't look it up and it didn't say herpes zoster of leg. But is there any other place that herpes zoster of leg would better go? It really wouldn't go with meningitis. It wouldn't go with other nervous system complication. On the 053.2 with ophthalmic complications, it wouldn't go there. 0.7 with other specified complications. There are no other complications. So it's herpes zoster without mention of complication, and it just goes, yeah. The .9 is kind of your unspecified or kind of a catch-all code. Now that brings us to the not otherwise specified. If I knew that the patient had herpes zoster, that's all I know. Go back to your herpes and tell me what the code would be for just herpes zoster. 053.9. And see how it gets thrown into the not otherwise specified category. So when you don't know anything else about it other than that one little statement, that's when we are okay to end up coding it as a not otherwise specified.